Well, hello, this is Bill Rogers, and we're studying the Gospel of John. We're in chapter 18, the second half. We are using Southern Baptist Lifeway literature, the Explore the Bible series, which I have found just very wonderful. I love teaching it, and it keeps you moving through the scripture and does not have any complications of having to, well, I don't even know what to say. Shut up in that point. All right, so here we are. I want to do a screen share on the trials of Jesus. Last week we talked about the arrest, and today we are going to look at a couple of the trials. We covered a little bit of this. The various scripture references are in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John, Luke, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke, then as you're reading down that right column. But the first thing was to Annas, and we discussed that just a little bit last week. And he was the father-in-law of the current high priest, who's Caiaphas. And the way that this scholar has arranged the table is there are two trials in Caiaphas's home with the Sanhedrin and the full Sanhedrin, they call it. And Luke is the only one that mentions that second hearing or second trial. And we can go and the trial, the charge they ended up with in this trial before the Sanhedrin was blasphemy. And that would have required a death penalty under Jewish law if it, unfortunately, it was true that he was the Son of God. And so they're totally misaligned with reality and are totally blind to the facts and are misreading it totally. And then he's brought to Pilate, which is today's lesson. We will be in John 18:28 to 38. There is a trial that's only mentioned in Luke where Pilate finds out Jesus is from Galilee, and so he sends him across town to Herod, who was the tetrarch of Galilee, for a very brief hearing, and Herod can do nothing with him, so he sends him right back to Pilate. But it said they got to be friends after that. And then there is the second trial, which is then John 18:39 through 19:16. When we compare the other passages, John puts the two together and does not mention the trial over to Herod. So each gospel writer has a little bit different view on the total story, and we put all the pieces together, and I find it to be very interesting. So we're going to pick up in, well, let's see, Jesus has a hearing before Annas, and that was, we touched on that a little bit in last week's lesson. And that's where Peter in the courtyard denies Jesus before the servant girl who says you were with him. So, and then one of the officers strikes Jesus there when he didn't like the way he answered Annas. And Jesus answered, if I have spoken evil, bear witness of the evil. But if well, why do you strike me? And there is no good answer to that. It's just, I don't like you, you're guilty, and we've already decided to mistreat you. The decision is already made. We're just trying to find a way to get there. So picking up in verse 24, it says this, then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. All right, so that's his son-in-law. They would have been very close to each other. Now Simon Peter stood and warmed himself. Therefore they said to him, you are not also one of his disciples, are you? And he denied it and said, I'm not. So I see Peter is almost playing secret agent. You know, I'm trying to find out, is there a way that I can get in here somehow and rescue Jesus from this? And one of the servants of the high priest, a relative of him whose ear Peter cut off, said, did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter then denied again, and immediately a rooster crowed. Okay, verse 28. They then led Jesus from Caiaphas to the praetorium. If you want the details of that hearing, you have to go to the other gospels, where they decide Jesus is guilty of blasphemy, And an interesting side note that I've gotten from teaching the other gospels is they mentioned that they covered Jesus' face or his eyes and strike him, and they say, prophesy, who struck you? And the cross-reference footnote to that is there's a prophecy in Isaiah that says the Messiah, when he comes, will be able to judge without seeing with the eye. And so they have taken that literally, and they put a bag over his head, and they start to slug him, and they say, hey, prophesy, if you're the Messiah, tell us who hit you, because the Messiah can prophesy without the seeing of the eye. And of course, he could have told them everything. I immediately, in my mind, go back to the woman taken in adultery in John chapter 4, where he stoops down and writes on the ground. And one of the theories as to what he's writing is the names of women that some of those guys had been messing around with, because he knew stuff like that. Now, they led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Praetorium. Pilate was only in town at the Praetorium, which would be barracks plus other judicial buildings, during the Passover, and maybe a couple other times of year, some of my source material said. So he happened to be in town because this was when multitudes came to Jerusalem for the Passover week. And so they take Jesus over to this place, but they themselves did not go into the Praetorium, lest they should be defiled, but that they might eat the Passover. So they are very scrupulously keeping one part of the Jewish law. Now, we want now at this remove to divide the Jewish law into what we call ritual law and moral law. And so there are things like don't kill, which still apply today, but the ritual law that said if you touch a corpse, you have to wait a certain time and wash in a certain way, and you can't enter into a religious service while you are ritually unclean. And there were whole sets and subsets of rules like this, and one of them was if they went into a Gentile's house, they would be unclean and therefore unfit to participate in the Passover. So they're going to stand out in the front door. Ironically, what they're trying to do is bear false witness against Jesus, because they could not get their witnesses in the trial before the Sanhedrin to agree with each other. So they could not literally, even if they were in charge, could not have sent the death sentence on him unless they'd already made up their minds to do so. Now, they're going to the Romans because under Roman law, the Jewish authorities could no longer impart the death penalty. They could do civil penalties. They were allowed to do a certain amount of judicial type activity under the Roman rule, but the death penalty was reserved for the Roman occupying force. And so they have taken Jesus to get the death penalty to Caesar, and we're going to see that. Interestingly, Annas, the high priest, was removed from office. There is a historical record because he had executed some of his political rivals. And the Romans took him out and put one of his sons in place as high priest. And so they lead Jesus from Caiaphas to the Praetorium, where Pilate was in town. Now, Pilate is a Roman, but he was actually born in what today is called Spain, Roman-occupied Spain. But he has had a political career that is not without controversy. So what follows reads very much like a modern Western thought interchange, and we will come back to that momentarily. So they can't go in, the religious leaders, the heads of the Sanhedrin, the priestly family, they cannot go into defile themselves. So it says Pilate then went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? And they answered and said to him, if he weren't an evildoer, we would not have delivered him up to you. It's kind of like the kid with his hand in the cookie jar. His mother says, what are you doing? And he says, if you hadn't wanted me to eat these cookies, you wouldn't have brought them into the house. You know, it's like, just don't ask questions, Mr. Pilate, sir. We want you to have a ruling of death against this guy. And so the word evildoer is a criminal in some translations. We would not have delivered him to you. We're bringing him here for a purpose. We've got a problem with this guy. We want you to kill him. Then Pilate said to them, you take him and judge him according to your law. Therefore the Jews said to him, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death. We think he's worthy of death. We brought him to you. We've already done that, is what they answer him. And this is that the saying of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying by what death he would die. Now, their mode of execution was stoning. But Jesus in prophecy has already said, John 3, when I'm lifted up, I'll draw all men to myself. There's the prophecy in the Mosaic law that's embedded in there is, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. And so Jesus hanging on the cross, which is made from a tree, bears the curse for all of us. So all these little pieces start to come together, but stoning would not have fulfilled that aspect of the prophecy. And then there's the I was pierced and they gazed upon me. That actually is in the Psalms. All of these prophetic pieces are going to come together during the crucifixion, but Jesus has spoken prophetically on more than one occasion that he would be, that how he would die in some of the details there. So verse 33, Pilate entered the praetorium again, called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Now, I want you to look at how Jesus answered every question that Pilate asks. Somewhere he has gotten the idea that Jesus has claimed to be the king of the Jews, and these people are upset. Now, they have had insurrection after insurrection, zealots, that was a political group that were trying to murder people. Barabbas, who's going to be set free. In some of your translations, it may say he was an insurrectionist and a murderer. So there's always something going on where they are trying to get back into political power and take it away from the Romans. He is there to defend Rome's position as overlord and occupying force in this region. And when he came to town, he came, I don't know, with a legion of soldiers or with a cohort of soldiers, but he has a bunch of soldiers to guard him, and they are there to keep the peace during the Passover, lest nationalistic impulses should rise up and a spontaneous revolt should occur. So he's asking Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? Tell me about yourself. And Jesus answered him, are you speaking for yourself on this, or did others tell you this about me? And Jesus knows. Pilate apparently doesn't know enough about Jewish messianic hopes. He just loathes these people he is responsible for keeping in peace. Now, Luke has, I think it's in Luke, where there's a mention of a group of people from Galilee where Pilate, it says, mingled their blood with those of their sacrifices. There is no extra biblical record of that particular event, which implies that either in the courtyard of the temple or even farther in, that there was some sort of interaction between Roman troops and these people where they ended up being killed, and the animals too. And so it was just a slaughter. One would think that if it had occurred in the temple precincts, it would have been documented in Jewish history, say in Josephus. There is another story similar to this where he had gotten in trouble with the Roman headquarters because he had had some people murdered like that by Roman troops, unarmed people murdered by Roman troops. But I will leave that to you. But I don't think the specific event mentioned in Luke is in place here. So given that history, he knows he can be called back to Rome at a moment's notice, and he can be executed for incompetence. How would you like that in your service review? Man, we've only given you 25% rating on your competence in this judicial arena, so you have to report in the morning, get your head cut off. So that would be the kind of boss that he worked for. Very brutal. He had to be brutal in turn, but not too brutal. And so he's always on the alert for insurrectionists, for zealots, for nutcases that would want to overthrow the Roman government. So when Jesus asked him a question, he answers a question with a question. He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Okay. Did somebody else feed you this question? Or are you asking on your own? I just want to know. And then Pilate, taken aback, says, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you to me," parenthesis, "in order for me to have you executed," close parenthesis. What have you done to get these people this mad at you? Now, that's the Bill's translation, which is not literal, word for word. Verse 36, Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would fight so that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But here I am, bound. So it's obvious my kingdom is not of this world, because the guys that follow me have not been fighting. But now my kingdom is not from here." So if you think of Pilate's worldview, not only is he subject to recall, he's already been in trouble with headquarters and been reprimanded. And now his world is populated by human beings overseen by this pantheon of capricious gods. And there are stories of the gods coming down and not being received hospitably, and then raining terror on the people that did bad to them. There's also that footnote over, I think, in Luke, that says that Pilate's wife had dreamed about this and sent him word saying, "You're going to see a unguilty man." What's the right word I want there? A guiltless man, and be very careful how you treat him. So he's asking him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus suddenly moves it back to the pantheon of gods. My kingdom is not of this world. My kingdom is somewhere else. Maybe Pilate would have heard that as where the gods live, on Mount Olympus. Who knows where Jesus, this guy's kingdom, is coming from? He is obviously not afraid of Pilate. He is not cowed by the experience. And so it says, Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world. My servants would have fought. Here I am bound in front of you." So it's obvious I'm not a king like you're worried about. I'm not a king that's going to come in and try to raise a rebellion and start some war against Rome, like he had also recently seen with small zealot groups rising up from there to there. So then Pilate says, "So you're a king then?" He's trying to clarify this. He's letting Jesus, as it were, hang himself with his own words. He wants to get the truth out. He says, "Are you a king then?" And Jesus answers, "You say that correctly, that I am a king. And for this cause I was born into the world, that I have come into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth, or who is of truth, hears my voice." Now, that is paired with another startling verse over in Matthew, where Jesus says the reason, he's speaking to the Pharisees at the time, those who were hearing him and rejecting him, the reason you do not hear from God is that you don't belong to God. Jesus is saying something very clearly similar to that, to this pagan Roman power figure. So the reason, he says, if anyone who belongs to the truth hears my voice, if you belong to truth, to actual reality, the way the universe is, then you'll hear what I'm saying. You'll receive it. Is, I would add into, not just hear, yeah, I heard what he said. It is, you hear it, you receive it, you act on it. Okay, Pilate says to him, what is truth? That is a very modern question. The man is so cynical. The man is so, what is the word we want? He has seen that it really comes down to who has the power. That's the way he views the world. That is almost a postmodern view, like we would have, like we would encounter today. So he says, what is truth? And when he had said this, he goes out again to the Jews. So my picture is he's taken Jesus in with him. They won't come in. And so he's talked to him, he's interrogated him. He goes back out, and here's what he says. He says, I find no fault in him at all. He says, I find nothing to charge him with. This guy is a prophet and a dreamer, and he's not claiming anything that threatens Rome. That's where he wants to leave it. But you have a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. So every year, one of the statistics says 100,000 people converged from the Mediterranean region on Jerusalem for the Passover. And he says, here they are, and we've got a custom to set people free. From, one prisoner gets to go free as kind of throwing a crumb of bread to the dogs. Here you get to choose who gets to go free. So, do you want me to release to you your king, the King of the Jews? You want him? I'll set him free. I don't find anything to charge him with. He hadn't done anything. And they all cried again, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. And it says, now Barabbas was a robber. Other gospels call him an insurrectionist and a murderer. So he was apparently a bandit of some kind or another. There's indication that his first name was Jesus, by the way, which is ironic. Jesus, son of Abbas, Bar Abbas. So Pilate took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers twisted the crown of thorns. And so that's where we end. We've already moved into chapter 19. So in the course of these events and these trials, Pilate proclaims Jesus to be innocent on not just this particular one statement, I find nothing to charge him with, but also in the other gospel accounts. And we could go spend some time with those, but instead we will stop here and we'll pick up next week in the subsequent lessons. But the picture here is Jesus is still in control. We noticed during his arrest that he was in control. He said, let these go free. And then they fled. It says, I read it, they jumped over the fence and went out into the darkness and ran off. Peter comes back. He denies Jesus. Jesus, in control during the trial, looks and makes eye contact when that rooster crows the third time. He looks at Peter, and Peter goes out weeping. And so that's also one of the details. Jesus is managing the details in all of this. And soon now, the death penalty is going to be imposed. And John just summarizes it. They want Barabbas released. And so Pilate took Jesus and had him scourged. And that, of course, we've heard the descriptions of how sometimes the prisoners would die during the scourging due to so much damage to their tissue from bits of metal or bone that were embedded in the tips of the whip that they whipped them with. So maybe he was hoping that Jesus would die at that point. Who knows? But what a puzzlingly current response it is for Pilate to have had Jesus right there in front of him and to be able to interrogate him and ask him the questions, and Jesus give clear testimony about where he was from and who he was from. Okay, I would like for you to open the microphones for insights, understanding, further depth that you may have encountered in your study of the passage. And if you have questions that maybe we could address, but also one question for you is, why do people today reject Jesus? And there are multitudes of answers, probably as many answers as there are people rejecting Jesus, but what are the broad categories you see there? And so I'll just let you guys talk, if you will.
I think people reject Jesus back to the problems we have in this world now, the feedback loop. Everybody they hear their own things and they hear what they want to hear. They're not open to any new ideas. And we just get diametrically opposed to anything else out there.
Okay.
It's just sad, but I don't know how to break that.
Okay. Thanks. James, do you have something?
No, can you hear me?
No, I'm not hearing you at all.
Let's see. Where was there?
Yeah.
Unmuted.
That's
Yes.
better. Yeah,
Okay, I don't know why you can't hear us.
it's working now.
Oh, okay. I guess I just came closer. No, I don't have anything to add.
Um,
I
the
think because of immorality, sometimes people don't want to be answerable to God, you know.
do you gain any insights on the nature of power when you consider how the Pharisees were doing one thing and then apparently blind to what their own actions were and thinking they were doing God's will? Is there anything there that we could tease out?
I'm not sure that the Pharisees really understood. I think that they were just scared of giving up their power and authority, and they didn't want anything else to happen. It's going to happen on their terms. And Jews today think that the Savior is yet to come.
Yeah.
And they're just blinded by it because they only want what they want. And they just, again, refuse to accept anything else.
And I said Pharisees, but it also would include the Sanhedrin.
Yeah.
Perhaps it should have said that. Now, we do know that there were two members of the Sanhedrin who were favorable to Jesus. Nicodemus, who goes and Joseph of Arimathea, who gathers courage and goes and asks for the body of Jesus. Both of those were, you would think they would have voted no or abstained or something. But the thing I glean from that is we can be so blinded by small religious doctrinaire approach where we can't go in or we'll be unclean, but we're delivering a man to death based on false or inadequate testimony. And we're asking you to collude with us in the execution of an innocent man. And so that aspect of things is we have to do a little self-inspection and say, am I capable of this in some arena in my life where I think I'm a good guy because I do X, but over here on this direction, I'm doing Y, which I would excuse and say, no, I'm doing God's will or even something, or I don't care what God's will is. I still need this to be. Any other insights from anyone?
I think decisions are made and probably poorly made when you've heard the term pick your battles. Well, I'll go along with this now because later I can do a greater good. And
Ooh.
even though it's not right, you go, they'll just throw me in jail if I disagree now, and what good can I do then?
Yeah.
And we don't do the right thing regardless. I mean, look at those people who stood up for Christ in Rome. They got burnt at the stake. Um, it they were martyrs. That was a good thing, but it sure didn't help them in the world. You got to think beyond the world.
Yeah. Short term, they sure got a rough deal, but then under God's decisive authority, capacity, power, plans, they were in alignment with that. Wow, what a hard thing. So we take up our cross daily and follow him. Wow.
Here's one possibility. Here's one possibility why people make the kind of mistakes we're talking about, and that is they will choose a particular philosophy and they will reject anything which tends to, they think, go against that philosophy. I'll give you a perfect example in the church, and this is going to be controversial. A person might decide, I will believe nothing but what the Word of God says. Now, that right off the bat is inaccurate. What they're saying is really, I believe nothing except my interpretation of what the Bible is saying. And so some of those interpretations can conflict with other statements of God. For example, people like that may tend to ignore physical reality occasionally.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
but I'll just let that go there. So just a wrong concept of what your basis of reality is, I think, can cause mistakes.
You know, that's very true, is that we can come in with what shorthand called a worldview or a philosophy of approach that totally excludes certain possibilities which can't even be considered, but everybody's worldview is finite. And so, as James has pointed out, it may not correspond to reality in several ways, but we often find people that are totally immovable away from what they've already decided to be so, and they will ignore. And an example is what the articles James has written on evolution. Chemically, evolution is unbelievably improbable as a random process. It just can't happen, because the energy to destroy an amino acid chain, which makes up proteins, which are all of those long chain molecules, which are the basis of life, is you've got to have just enough that it kind of just past hooking together, and then it hooks together, and then you got to do that thousands and thousands and millions of times, where if you put in too much energy, it all comes apart. It cooks it. And there is a physical reality that has yet to been dealt with on a serious level by the people who reject God based on a totally materialistic worldview, for example. And so we have that sort of blindness, and we see that sort of religious blindness in the Pharisees, where they can't see outside the codified, like Jesus heals on the Sabbath, so he can't be the Messiah because he's breaking the Sabbath. And they don't see that he's Lord of the Sabbath. And they're now, once they've decided that, they're blind to the fact that nobody in the history of the world has ever done things like this guy does. Like the man born blind gave really good testimony about Jesus. He said, here's a crazy thing. He can't be a sinner, because God doesn't work through somebody like this who's a sinner and do these things that nobody's ever seen before. So yeah, they've got their blinders on. We can have our blinders on with regard to any number of other topics, from prosperity to personal health to self-determination, that makes us stand up against God and shake our fist in his face and say, I deny that even the existence of God. And then an excuse, because any God would not allow this sort of thing to happen. And they don't then take their philosophy to that next step, which is, now what? That's just the way it is. So then why are you mad at me when I talk about God? So, yeah, so,
I don't remember who it was that said that he can't be the Messiah because nothing good comes out of Galilee.
yeah, Nazareth.
Nazareth,
Nothing good
yeah.
comes out of Nazareth. That was one of
Yeah,
the
so he
apostles.
can't be. They're
It's
expecting
like
someone to be born a
nothing
prince
good
and become a king.
comes out of Bront if you live in Ballinger.
Yeah, but I was
We
going
like
to add,
people in
before you
power.
add it, I was going to add the evolution thing because you'll find people just as adamant on the side of evolution. They absolutely refuse. I can show you statements of that from evolutionists who will deny uh, spiritual reality because of their commitment to evolution. And it's not because of the data; it's because of their
Yeah,
commitment. Is they call it a
they've already made a commitment. And
yeah.
in fact, there is a class of mental diseases called personality disorders. I recommend you read about them. You'll start diagnosing people right and left. But it seems to be functioning mechanisms that go awry and start destroying relationships. And they have found over and over that just talking about it doesn't do any good because those folks own the truth. It's their way and no other way. And it's so much like that in the way these other philosophies approach the facts of the scripture, the facts of the resurrection, this data of the documents, and on and on. Well, we've kind of gone past our time.
Well,
But
here's a quick way to say that about amino acids. It takes more energy to put amino acids together than it does to break them apart. And there's the problem with nature. You have to have a very controlled use of the energy, and nature can't do that. So nature can't make a protein, and nature cannot be the origin of life. That is
yeah,
crystal from basic chemistry.
yeah, you can hook together 3 or 4 or 5, but you can't hook together 10,000. Yeah, it comes
Even
back.
four farms, the best experiments, they've temporarily seen maybe 3 or 4, but they don't last.
Yeah.
Because energy putting together will break them right apart.
Well, all righty, folks, we'll do this again. We have now a Tuesday night option for the next few weeks, and we will also have 2 Sunday morning options for a while, and we'll see how these go. And if you're watching this on YouTube, send us a note if you enjoy this, and if you watch to the end to get to this place. And we really appreciate the folks who have participated in this class since March of 2020. This has been such a terrific experience for us. All right.
Thank you for all the time you're putting in for this. 3 different classes now. Wow.
Well, Roger Hahn does that 9:30 class.
Well,
so
I understand that, but you're still there with your phone taking care of that for us for the early morning.
Yeah.
I
Well, you're
prefer the
welcome.
dialogue, but I mean, it's better than nothing too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you enjoy it. I've been really glad to see you get on there. All righty. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.